We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, Tuesday, January 6, 2025. Coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod, YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast. Still working on that one, trying to get it all under one giant umbrella of @amradpod, which you can find on X @amradpod, and me @real Steve Friend. If you happen to like us over on the audio format, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, we'll be sure to drop the show after we get done recording it today. And today is a Tuesday. What are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about crime and how it kind of pays. We're going to weigh into all the fervor surrounding the waste, fraud, and abuse of federal government programs. Also, talk about a blast from the past, voter fraud, election fraud, the thing that was driving so many people to the polls and to grassroots events out there, trying to get some transparency. And then we just kind of forgot about it. Not a whole lot of people talking about it. And then we'll actually weigh into the real reason for so much fervor around childcare fraud and rental fraud and healthcare fraud. So a lot to get to. We're going to do it in the condensed format, the news show format. We're trying to make it bite-sized for you to get to on your lunch break. And without wasting any more time, let's get to it. Let's talk about some voter fraud. First piece I got today is from the Federalist. Headline is, Fulton County, we don't dispute, 315,000 votes lacking poll worker signatures were counted in 2020. This is all back to how we had all these questions surrounding the outcome of the presidential election in 2020. You know, that whole incident where we all went to bed and one guy was in the lead. And then when we woke up, the other guy was in the lead, and people had some legitimate questions, which caused them to go to redress their grievances in front of the House and the Senate, January 6, 2021, 5 years ago today, which led to the greatest overall case in the history of the FBI, where they went after grandmas for walking behind red velvet ropes inside the people's house. But now it seems like, at least according to some Freedom of Information Act revelations in the state of Georgia, that those people might have been accurate. So the reporting goes further. Earlier this month, Fulton County, which is the home of Atlanta, largest city in the state of Georgia, admitted that approximately 315,000 early votes from 2020 were illegally certified, but still included in the final result. Now, the Georgia law requires that election officials have each a ballot scanner print 3 closing tapes at the end of each voting day, and they have to sign it, and they also have to do it at the beginning of the day. It gets a little bit technical, but for the best that I could ascertain, and I'm hardly an expert when it comes to voting and all the processes attached to it, but you have these machines. You go up to it, you cast your vote, and it tabulates it for you. But in order to ensure that it's accurate, it's a little bit like zeroing out a scale. You open up for the day, you make sure that there's no leftover votes, either from the day before, from a prior election. Let's say theoretically we had a voting election day as opposed to election season like we do now. They would be out for one day, and maybe you forgot to clear out the databases attached to it. Maybe you ran some tests in the days, weeks, or months leading up to an election. You got some new software, you want to check it out. You don't want to have those fake votes that you were just running legitimate tests on the software for tabulated in the actual vote count. So you would go in and you'd print off these documents in triplicate, and the poll workers would sign it to make sure that there's 0 votes in the machine. And then at the end of the day, they would print off the totals, and then you would sign those exact same documents. But according to the Federalist here, and according to some open records requests, that didn't happen in Fulton County. Back to the piece. Voting laws require the poll workers to begin each day of voting by printing and signing the 0 tape. But if there's no record of whether the tabulator was set at 0 at the start of the polling, there's no way of telling whether the ballots from a previous election or from a test run, as I said before, were left on the memory card and might be counted later. This open records request looked at a bunch of these tapes. They were not only not signed, but they represented 315,000 votes at various precincts around Atlanta, which was one of the problematic spots in 2020. It also highlighted that they were able to pull more data out that showed that there were some late hours going on in Atlanta when it came to tabulating votes. 2:09 a.m. the following day, which would be a problem because it's kind of unusual. There was also the narrative about them sending people home. And then when some people went home, they kept counting after the fact. And then you had the allegations and actual video evidence of them putting up wooden panels on the windows so people couldn't see what they were doing. All the questions about it. Well, now you actually have a little bit of transparency. We know, and they're not pushing back. The Board of Electors, the state Board of Electors in Georgia is saying, yeah, our bad. Sorry about it. We kind of screwed that one up. Now, they didn't come forward and say that they were fake votes. They just said that they didn't follow the law. And perhaps the people who were then accused of conspiracy theories or even brought into some sort of conspiracy allegations criminally in Georgia, they were on solid footing. Now, what's the end goal here? And it's kind of what I alluded to early on, how nothing's really going to happen. What's going to happen? You can't undo history. You can't make 2021 through 2025, January of the Joe Biden human Roomba administration go away. All those executive orders, as much as they want to talk about, the auto pen, we need to undo all of it. Never going to happen. You can't turn back the clock. We're not Superman. We can't fly around the earth and make time go backwards. What are they going to get? They're going to get an asterisk in the history books. So I guess when we teach our youth about how potentially was one of the greatest frauds in the history of electoral politics in the lone superpower for the globe, then they can say, well, yeah, there was some irregularities. Confirmed, we weren't conspiracy theorists. It was conspiracy facts. That crime paid off. You had the Biden administration come in. We had sweeping changes across the executive branch. We even had the runoff in Georgia specifically, and Georgia wound up voting in 2 Democrat senators. That swung the balance in the Senate. It allowed the Biden administration to push through things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the Green New Deal, and billions and trillions of dollars in spending that caused what we like to call Bidenflation, which is not really fair because a lot of the inflation that was suffered during the Biden administration, particularly in the opening month, opening year, was a result of the coronavirus spending, which we have another part on today. And we all suffer the consequences. 9% inflation, 10% inflation, people really unable to make ends meet. There was too much month at the end of the money. Can't go back in time, but I guess we get an asterisk. That's what we get. The other people, they ascended to spots of power within the government. And when they left, they got lucrative media gigs, or they went to some sort of NGO or nonprofit or a think tank where they're pulling in 6-figure salary. Meanwhile, you're shopping for yellow tag beef at Walmart. Now, that crime paid. Let's talk about something, though, that's a little bit more topical, a little bit more in the news. And that's been this fervor that's surrounding the childcare fraud that's gone on, particularly in Minnesota. There's been some videos coming out, some exposés. I've got a couple videos I want to throw out. And it is a former Homeland Security investigator, HSI. That's the 1811 criminal investigator. That's the special agent for Homeland Security, the equivalent of the FBI special agent, the DEA agent, the U.S. Marshal. Here's a guy from Minnesota, and he wanted to talk about how this fraud was going on, and it wasn't necessarily a recent thing. Got a couple clips. Here's the first one.
Daycares. They were setting up sham daycares, fake bills, fake students, or just enrolling students that never came, which just all fake daycares. That's the easiest way to explain it. And then over the next several months, we executed several search warrants throughout South Minneapolis, Lake Street, and different areas at these daycares. Never, not one of the daycares I served warrants on, not one person was ever present. Just empty buildings, stacks of invoices and student records of people that our surveillance showed never went there. Nobody ever came in and out of these daycares. It was just completely empty from my experience. Never was occupied daycare. And like I said, we worked that for 3-4 months. I was assigned that case just as a support person to assist with anything needing as far as financial experiences we have with HSI and our immigration authorities and ability to pull records and stuff like that. And ultimately, the task force just kind of went away. Not sure whatever happened to it. The meetings, I would get email notices when their next planning meeting, what we're going to do next, and all of a sudden it just evaporated.
All right, that guy's name is Jeremy Christensen. And he gives his bona fides at another point in that interview, which we go to Alpha News. Liz Collin reports, give them the hat tip on that one. That's not him talking about the Biden administration. That was going on in 2015, a decade ago. This is hardly a new thing, which I do think is worth noting. And the explanation for that, it's not good. But before we get to the plausible explanations for why these sorts of frauds have been allowed to continue, let's go back to Jeremy for another piece. And this is a further commentary on the frauds that went on in Minneapolis and Minnesota and how they just never were adjudicated.
I was a local police officer for 10 years in Minnesota, spent 4 years as a federal air marshal and 16 as a special agent with HSI. And in my 16 years as a special agent with HSI, I presented multiple immigration fraud cases where persons had lied, cheated, misconstrued information on immigration applications. And in my experience, in my personal experience, I never once had one case accepted for prosecution for immigration fraud from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Not one. And I presented some pretty damning cases that involve people deaths, circumstances where homicides were involved, circumstances where children were killed, and not one time was ever a case prosecuted. Not once.
Well, that doesn't sound very good, but it's important to know that federal prosecutors have pretty wide discretion. They can decline legitimate cases. I've walked into a United States Attorney's office with a legitimate violent crime. I mean, I brought in stabbing cases. I had somebody stabbed in the eyeball and they declined it. I had other stabbings where they said, how stabbed was he? But now that this is the flavor of the week or flavor of the month, however quickly the news cycle spins, maybe the United States Attorney's offices are going to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more willing to accept these sorts of cases. But I do think it's worth noting that there's a finite amount of resources. It isn't necessarily a nefarious reason that a prosecutor would decline to take a case. They just don't have the bandwidth for it. Maybe they don't have the expertise for it. Or maybe they have a political agenda. Maybe they're getting a directive from the actual appointed United States attorney that says that's not a priority for us. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to address it. We've got more important things, more pressing matters like grandmas who walked through the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And they were a threat to our democracy. That mean orange, literally Hitler president and all of his supporters, we need to send a message. And then you pull those prosecutors, those frontline assistant United States attorneys and say, go forward and pursue those domestic terrorism cases and push this off, this millions and potentially billions of dollars in fraud because we don't care about it. We could always just print more money. But then there could be other reasons exactly like they're just not competent or not interested. Or if they take the case, and as that former Homeland Security investigator sort of gets into, he brought lots of cases. They might not want to take a case because if they take his case, he's going to go tell all his other special agent buddies, hey, I found a prosecutor that'll take these. And then they get pigeonholed. They have to take them from everybody. Hey, yeah, you took John's. Why don't you take Jim's? Why don't you take mine? And a lot of these federal prosecutors, they want variety. They're like everybody else. They don't want to have the exact same caseload all the time, doing the exact same things. And maybe they're having ambitions to go on to other job prospects, and they're looking at a white shoe law firm. And look, this is hard. It's investigating. It's going to take months, potentially years. And I want to eject by springtime. So it's just not worth it. I mean, it's not really relevant to the discussion today, but also worth noting. I took prosecutable human trafficking cases to a federal prosecutor. And the quote that I got back was, that just sounds like a lot of work. We're going to decline. But, hey, good enough for government work, right? We leave at noontime on Friday, and the winner of the pie eating contest, you know what they get? They get another pie. Let's just do the bare minimum to not get fired. Now, this is all pertaining to the Minnesota frauds surrounding childcare. There's been other stuff, though, that's caught on, and the Small Business Administration is looking into those matters. You have Kelly Loeffler, who ran for Senate in Georgia and lost, but now she's been appointed to be the administrator over the Small Business Administration. And she went on cable news and was talking about looking into more fraud cases, more fraud allegations. Let's give this one a play.
Jason, you're right. It's a ton of money, and it's just the tip of the iceberg happening in Minnesota. And as I said, I think there's more to come across the country. This is just the start. It's the first state. But what we did on day one, remember, it was back Thanksgiving weekend when we found out the depth of this fraud. It was estimated at $1 billion. We know it's well over that now. We started to investigate, and within 3 days, we found $3 million worth of fraud. So I want to thank my great team for working over the holidays, going through thousands and thousands of loans. We found about 7,900 fraudulent loans, including about 6,900 individuals. Some of those people had 2 loans that are never going to be able to do business with the SBA again. They're on the do not lend list. They will not get a disaster loan. They cannot get SBA funding. And so we're going to compile this data, turn it over to federal authorities, because we do think, as you just talked about with Chairman Comer, we're going to see people in handcuffs. We're going to see people in jail. And I'm so grateful to the chairman for holding this committee, but it's also taking action from those of us in the Trump administration who are in lockstep with the chairman and making sure that people do go to jail and that we have accountability for the hardworking American people who are paying taxes every single day.
So Kelly Loeffler took her information, she said, to the right channels for prosecution. That remains to be seen. But she made sure to bring it over to James Comer to head the Oversight Committee. James Comer, who basically just uses taxpayer dollars to hold hearings. It's all about transparency, things we like. He has hearings and writes strongly worded letters and then aggregates all that information so that he can publish a book, which you can buy. So you finance his book. He probably has AI write it, and then you can purchase his book. No personal enrichment going on there from James Comer, that phony. But Kelly Loeffler, she threw out a couple facts. It was noted in The Hill, just for your reference, her quote was, "Today, our agency took action to suspend 6,900 Minnesota borrowers amid suspected fraudulent activity. In total, these borrowers were approved for 7,900 PPP and EIDL loans worth approximately $400 million. $400 million in loans that the government was giving out. And I gave those acronyms there. The PPP, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, that was under coronavirus, where they just gave these loans out to businesses that said, hey, we got to stay home, stay safe, shut down your non-essential business that you use to feed your family and pay your mortgage. And because your employees are not going to get paid because you're not doing actual commerce, we as a government will print and borrow money and just shovel it out to you in the form of a loan. And as long as you pay your businesses, your payroll, then we'll forgive the loan. So government stimmy checks during coronavirus. That was the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, which had billions of dollars of fraud. I've talked to agents who were involved in the state of Washington. They were estimating it was $2 billion just in that state. And that was a case that was multiple years ago. I'm sure it's only gone up since then. The other one that Kelly Loeffler referenced was the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's also related to coronavirus. So loans and money shoveled out the door in 2020 is something that is now rearing its ugly head back because we have to get to the bottom of these things. Are we getting the money back? Why are we going through this rigmarole? Why is this an important thing that we need to push out there? Well, because Kelly Loeffler's got to get on TV. We got to talk about transparency. We have to make sure that we're in lockstep in this administration and we're really cooperating with Congress, and then we're going to get people into handcuffs, but it's never going to happen. I'll tell you why in a second, but before I do, got a couple of other pieces here that are sort of in the same vein. Hill also reported on this one, and this is outside of the Small Business Administration. This is over at Health and Human Services, and they announced similar measures that are going on. They're not just suspending loans out of the Small Business Administration. Headline, HHS, Health and Human Services, freezes child care payments to Minnesota and requires photo evidence across the country. So they're going to be a little bit better stewards of the taxpayer money, according to the Hill here. And they note that the Minnesota Child Care Development Fund has received $170 million in the last year. Now, childcare, we have business loans. What about rental assistance? From the New York Post, $5 billion in, quote, questionable rental assistance under the Biden administration revealed, including to thousands of deceased tenants. This comes from Housing and Urban Development. So now we have the Small Business Administration, we have Health and Human Services, and HUD, another department of the federal government, which has been shelling out money to people for things that they shouldn't be doing. But this comes from a report from the chief financial officer over at HUD. They uncovered 5.8 billion, so almost 6 billion, a little bit manipulative on that headline there of the New York Post. It was almost $6 billion, and they call them questionable payments out of the nearly 50 billion in the total federal rental assistance. So we're now over 10% of all the money that HUD gave out to give to poor people so they could pay the rent was given out to frauds, 30,000 deceased tenants, and also potential, as it's labeled, potential non-citizens. Thank you very much, New York Post. Illegal aliens, your taxpayer dollars, or borrowed money, or printed money, causing your dollars in your bank to become worth less and worth less and worth less because of Biden inflation or inflation from the current administration until they become worthless, was just shoveled out the door to people who were dead or people who were illegal aliens. Did the dead people go pick up those checks, or was it their family members who just pocketed the cash? And the illegal aliens, do they get a bite of the American dream because they're part of our social compact or something? Well, they got it. Where is yours? Now, I brought these examples, and there's a host of others, but I think for our purposes today, I can kind of cut it off there. I want to talk about why this will never happen. What will never happen? We'll never actually get the adequate number of prosecutions. Nobody anywhere close to the number, nowhere close to the number of people who committed these frauds will be held accountable. I think in one of the pieces from the Hill, they said, well, they've prosecuted about 100 people. You have $6 billion of fraud over from HUD. I don't think 100 people were pulling all that down. So most of the wrongdoers, most of the fraudsters are just getting away with it. But why will it never actually come to a resolution? Well, the illegal aliens, they don't subscribe to our social compact. The social compact that we had, that we documented in that old, pesky, dusty document, the Constitution, where it lays out very specifically the finite amount of things that we expect from our government: coin some money, sign some treaties, protect the border, particularly against illegal alien invasion, protect us against fraud and force. That's about it. That's called promoting the general welfare. That's our mission statement. Promoting the general welfare. What is the mission statement? Well, the government is implemented by the people to ensure that we have a life, liberty, and we can pursue our happiness. That's our mission statement. Do what is necessary with these finite amount of responsibilities to ensure that we get those things. Nothing more, nothing less. That's our expectation as part of our social compact. Now, why will this never, ever be addressed? Well, because we can distract you. We can nibble around the edges without actually talking about how these programs in and of themselves are violative of the social compact. Does it say anything about giving rental assistance in the Constitution? Is that promoting the general welfare? Not in the context of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's in the context of Obama phones. That's welfare, the way that it's understood today. But that's not constitutional. It's certainly not in any document that I've read, unless it's in invisible ink in the Good and Plenty Clause in the back of the Declaration of Independence that Nicolas Cage is going to find in the next movie in the National Treasure series. Now, there are 4 reasons that I can come up with why we do this Somalian childcare fraud story as it comes out, and without actually correcting the problem. The fundamental way that you would correct the problem is you say, hey, the government shouldn't be involved in childcare. it's not spelled out in its finite amount of responsibilities. So let's just do away with the entire childcare program. If you get rid of it, then all the fraud goes away. Let's do away with rental assistance. It doesn't say anything about paying the rent in the Constitution. Why does it exist? If we got rid of it, not only would the $6 billion in fraud disappear, but the $50 billion getting shoveled out to these people who are asking the recipients of it would go away, which would mean the government wouldn't have to print as much money or borrow as much money, making the dollars in your bank account worth less and worth less until they become worthless. It's almost like that would be in the interest of the promotion of general welfare. But for reasons. Well, one, you get a designated voter block. People who got that sweet, sweet government cash, they love it. They're on the hook. They want to make sure the cash keeps coming in, and they will vote for whoever promises to give them the goodies. So politicians love it, and they have their guaranteed voter block. Then you have the donor block, the people who used to work in government or worked adjacent to government in nonprofits, NGOs, those people who apply for the grants so that they can stand up a child care facility, or the fraudsters in general, but let's say legitimate. They want to get that sweet, sweet government cash coming in too. And that gets kicked back to the politicians who are now benefiting not just from having more voters, but more money coming into their coffers. The third group of people are the Kelly Loefflers of the world, the ones that have to put out content for the people to say, look, we have people who are fighting the good fight on our behalf. They're going to bring transparency. They're going to put people in handcuffs. Let's tune in tomorrow night to Fox News to find out just how much progress they've made. That gives her cannon fodder. It gives content for people to go on their respective cable news channel of choice to talk to their prospective audience of choice so that they can whisper sweet nothings in their ear, make promises. James Comer can get a nice hit on Hannity and say he's going to hold a hearing. Gives him plenty of content to talk about. And the last one is a little bit closer to my experience. I said the social compact part, the government is supposed to protect us against fraud and force. Well, now you have a jobs program. We can stand up a Federal Bureau of Investigation or some other investigatory arm over at the Small Business Administration and hire people with a healthy government salary making $140,000, $150,000, $160,000 a year to go and investigate fraud. When, if we just got rid of the program entirely, there would be no fraud. There would be no need for those investigators to specifically focus in on that. Not to say we shouldn't have any policing, because fraud does happen, but it certainly shouldn't happen because the government creates a fictional program that has some sort of fictional obligation in order to fulfill a welfare responsibility to the American people, when in fact, promoting our general welfare means you just do what is necessary to ensure our life, our liberty, and our ability to pursue our happiness. Now, all the fervor, it'll never be corrected. But why is it getting amped up? I want to talk about that. That'll be our last story today. This comes from the Epoch Times. Headline: DOJ says it's uncovered 1 million more documents potentially related to Epstein. Steve, how is this connected? Well, the Justice Department said on December 24th, when nobody was paying attention, Christmas Eve day, that it has uncovered more than 1 million additional documents potentially related to deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The law allowed the DOJ to withhold certain documents, including those that include personal information of victims, depict child pornography, and, quote, would jeopardize an active federal investigation or ongoing prosecution, unquote, which is a surprise to me since Kash Patel testified that there were no other people who were on Epstein's list. So I don't know why they would have an ongoing investigation. That seems pretty broad. It seems like we're going to get 99% of these documents redacted, which is what we're seeing. One last piece from the Epoch Times. It specifically bars the Department of Justice from withholding or redacting information, quote, on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. You can't say my friends, my donors, members of my administration, or my buddies in business are on this list, and we should redact it. Well, we'll never know if they did that because 99% of it is redacted. And how is it connected to all the fervor in the conversation about the Somali childcare, which is the Haitians are eating the dogs. That's the new version of it, because why are you worried about the dogs getting eaten? You should be worried about how many Haitians you brought in. If you just didn't bring in the Haitians, the dogs would be fined. Similarly, the Somalians who are bilking us out of millions and billions of dollars for childcare programs, we should just get rid of the childcare programs. And then they couldn't be fraudsters. That's the simplest thing to do, and it's very constitutional. But we're getting the fervor around that so that they could slip that Epstein stuff past the goalie through Christmas, through New Year's. One of the things that galvanized people almost to the same level that we saw with voter fraud, which we talked about earlier, was the Epstein list. And the administration, the officials over the Department of Justice do not want to be transparent with the American people about that. So they're happy to give you some distraction, some other content on cable news that you can hear, and guarantees that we're going to see people in handcuffs when we never actually will. All right. That's going to wrap us up today on the American Radicals podcast, but I will not leave you without a palate cleanse. I did the one yesterday about the closing days of Christmas and into a new year. Over the holiday, had a chance to go to an NFL football game with my sons. They're big football fans. We're doing flag right now, getting geared up for Pop Warner to start, because that season just never seems to end. And I know over the weekend, the National Football League was wrapping up its regular season and going into the playoffs. I think that I want to convict some of you people today with a rather controversial guy, but I think he tells a really good story. And that is one Tim Tebow about his only win in the playoffs.
I was playing for the Denver Broncos, and we were playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL playoffs, and we win. It's a surreal moment, and it's just like, it's unbelievable. I walk in this big room packed full of media. There's all these curtains out front, and I'm standing in front, and Patrick, our PR guy, there steps in front of me. He said, "Timmy, do you realize what happened?" And I'm like, "Yeah. We just beat the Steelers. We're going to play the Patriots." He's like, "Yeah, I know what happened, dude. Like, why'd you ask me such a silly question?" And he goes, "No. Do you know what happened?" And I'm like, "I thought I did." "Patrick, what happened?" Because you could just see this different demeanor. And he said, "Timmy, no, you don't know what happened. Timmy, it's exactly 3 years from the night that you wore John 3:16 under your eyes." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's so cool." And he said, no, you don't realize it. Timmy, during the game, you threw for 316 yards. And I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Timmy, during the game, your yards per rush were 3.16. Your yards per completion were 31.6. The ratings for the night were 31.6. And the time of possession was 31.6. And during the night, over 90 million people have Googled John 3:16. It's the #1 trending thing all over. And I think he even mentioned something about there were so many people tweeting about it that like Twitter even froze or something like that. At least that was what I was told. And I was standing in that hallway. And I don't think I had the reaction that a lot of people think I did. Because I went from a high and a celebration and a joy to a conviction and a disappointment.
Why?
Because when he was telling me that, I knew that God was convicting me, saying, "Timmy, you thought tonight was about a game. You thought it was about all of these things. It's never just about a game. I didn't die for a game."
Never about a game. It's never about a podcast. Always something a little bit more important if you have the patience and the fortitude to actually listen for it. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. We'll be back with you tomorrow, Wednesday, 12 o'clock Eastern time. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, subscribe, a follow, do all the things on rumble.com/amradpod, the American Radicals podcast on YouTube, over at X. Give us a 5-star rating and review on all the audio formats, and drop a comment in there. I'm going to do my best to try to interact with you to the best of my ability there. I always appreciate everything you guys do, waiting in the chat and waiting in the weeds for us every single day. So back with you tomorrow, Wednesday, noontime. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRad Pod.